really happy to welcome you, Aruni, to presenting today at this teaching seminar. So I'll just tell our listeners a little bit about you. Dr. Aruni Samarakoon is a scholar specialising in feminist studies and political science. She's passionate about exploring the interpretation of social realities through the lens of socialist feminism. Aruni seeks to integrate feminist epistemological methods into the study of political science and critically engage with everyday politics. She earned her PhD from the University of Hull, that was called Voices of Unnamed Women, a critical feminist reading of peace building in Sri Lanka. And prior to that, she completed her MA in political science at the University of Oslo and an MSc in development management at the University of Agder, both of those in Norway. Aruni is an Associate Diverse Fellow of the Political Studies Association, a committee member of the Early Career Network, and an Associate Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. She has over a decade of teaching experience in higher education institutions across Sri Lanka, Norway, and the UK. And Aruni, you're also an Associate Teaching Fellow of Advanced HE. That's quite a CV that you've got there. That's fantastic. I'll just welcome other people. Lovely to see you, Corinne and Kavindi. We'll start the presentation in just a moment, just to let you know that this is being recorded. But any questions and answers at the other side won't be recorded. It will just be Aruni's presentation that's recorded. Okay, so Aruni, would you like to start presenting your
Yeah,
slides? And we're
thank you,
looking forward to
Susan, and
listening to
thank
you.
you, PSA TLN, for the opportunity to share my view, and thank you, Kavinda and Karin. Right, let me share my screen, please. Yes, I hope you can see it.
Yep, that's
Yeah,
perfect. We can see it. Go
right.
ahead.
Okay. So I am a millennial. So this is my experience of teaching to the generation Z. So I use the cyber classroom, and that experience is a different from in person. So we are now also in a cyberspace. So how that experience either challenge or enhance the feminist ideology, that is my main argument. Right, we'll start then. Teaching political science through feminist methodology to Generation Z by a millennial in a cyber classroom. So prior to I go in details, I just want to tell that I make the note because I always get things forgotten. So I thought that I read the note, but if you feel like it's a boring or something, please let me know. And I like to have an interactive session instead reading the paper then. Right. This paper presents a synthesis of theoretical insights and empirical experiences in teaching political science to two distinct generational coherence within a cyber classroom setting. The key concept explored include feminist teaching and learning methodologies, corporatism, virtual platforms, and generation dynamics between millennials and Generation Z. By examining these concepts and their interrelations, the discussion aims to contribute to the scholarship on aligning feminist epistemology with the teaching and learning politics, particularly in navigating generational differences and adapting to the evolving virtual learning environment. I'm a millennial who belong to the generation that values reading and taking notes while sitting at a wooden table surrounded by the fresh and musty scent of bookshelves in a vast library. So I always assume that I go to the library, I sit down and take a book and read. That is my generation, I believe. Although I have a few millennial peers in the academic environment at the moment, I now teach Generation Z students whom I consciously avoid stereotyping as TikTokers, Instagram influencers, YouTubers, and snapshots. I don't define them, or my definition does not confine Generation Z to these parameters. Billy Wilson, published in 2021, defines Generation Z as those born between 1997 and 2012, describing them as a communicators, justice-driven, technological native, pragmatic, innovative, and enterprising and single-minded world changers. According to Wilson, Generation Z embodies a consciousness defined by a determination to achieve and enjoy a purpose-filled life. So I agree with Wilson because yes, they are very communicator. They have their ideas being shared in virtual platforms, and they very much try to engage with the virtual realities. On the other hand, millennials, we are born in between 1980s and 2004, we are the first generation to have access to the internet. So I'm proud of that. As a Facebook guinea pigs, yes, I don't have a Facebook now, but we started as a Facebook guinea pigs. They are considered the most educated and most diverse generation thus far and have never known a world without personal used to construct hierarchies. It doesn't mean that millennial are better than Generation Z or Generation Z are better than millennial is a millennial. So my argument is that these definitions are not used to construct hierarchies or power dynamics that position one generation is above another, but rather to establish a conceptual framework for the discussion. They also help to shape the parameters of virtual reality and the generational differences in access to and engage with it. It is not kind of a love and hate relationship as you have watched in Downton Abbey, the drama series. Of course, the social interactions between these two generations are full of dramas. Every generation is a full of drama. Yet, they do not necessarily create a firm or dysfunctional disconnection. My epistemological stance, grounded in feminist thought, emphasize connectivity between generations rather than division. So the feminist epistemology actually claim the connectivity rather than we completely divided or fragmented. The critical feminist theory I have employed in the pedagogy of teaching and learning political science has fostered generational connectivity. This raises two questions. What is the critical feminist framework that I have used in my teaching and learning pedagogy, and how does it promote such connectivity? To explain my stance, I draw on the feminist scholarship of Angela Davis and Chandra Mohanty. Angela Davis, you can see her picture, that is most wanted woman, one of the most wanted women during Ronald Reagan's period. And Angela Davis represents the blue legacy of academic knowledge in the United States through her influential works from Women, Race and Class that published in 1993, I believe, somewhere around, and her recent publication of Abolition Feminism Now. She asserts that collective revolutionary political movements are essential to achieving social justice. And such movements cannot be organized through the interaction of academic inquiry and activism. A connection Davis demonstrates through her own public engagement. To briefly revisit Davis' argument by examining the historical materialism of race and labor exploitation in the production and reproduction process of the capitalist cotton industry in the USA, she exposed how exclusion and privilege were constructed within systems of representation and knowledge. This exclusionary knowledge system, in turn, shaped the interpretation of social realities within capitalist social order of that era. Davis' scholarship is not limited to the experience of Black Americans. Rather, it encompasses all forms of marginalization within the capitalist system. Groups whose experiences must be studied, documented, and developed into knowledge to better understand social reality. Within that system, white working class women were exploited to a degree comparable to or even greater than that of Black American women. Ignoring or neglecting the discussion of such oppression within academic spaces undermines political dimensions of learning itself. What is now understood in feminist theory as everyday politics must be recognized as essential not only for comprehending contemporary movements, but also understanding the historical patterns through which the study of everyday political experiences has been excluded as a part of broader systems of oppression. Everyday politics embodies in intersecting categories of class, race, gender, migration, and other dimensions of social identity. These intersections are encountered in one form or another in everyday lives of people across both global north and global south. By examining diverse empirical experiences of these everyday encounters, are linking them to frame of historical materialism, we can begin to organize a systematic investigation that foster critical thinking, as Davis argues. Such critical thinking empowers scholars not only to dismantle prevailing systems of injustice, but also to envision and institutionalize social justice and aim central to the feminist pedagogy. So what I try to argue here is that Angela Davis' scholarship tried to bring the everyday politics of the groups which been excluded, marginalized within a capitalist system, and that marginalization and exclusion further expanded throughout the capitalist system, turned into the neoliberal economy, which now we have a corporate sector dominance. This argument is further illustrated through Davis' engagement with the interpretation of Black Lives Matter. We all remember that movement, which began in the United States in 2013 and gained global momentum in 2020. The movement originated as a social media initiative under the hashtag Black Lives Matter, launched activities Alisa Garza, Patrice Collas, and Io Tometi following the fatal shooting of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. So Trayvon Martin was visiting his relatives, and there was a disagreement happened, and George Zimmerman shot him, and Martin died. And it gained international, based on that incident, they started the Black Lives Matter, because it doesn't mean that you just being a black, you can kill or you can shot, being or always been suspected. So that movement then gained the international recognition after the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. In analyzing the objectives and the nature of this movement, Davis contends that the oppression of Black Americans is not a series of isolated incidents, but a manifestation of a systematic and structural order. She argues that dismantling such oppression and restoring accountability requires a process of demilitarization, one that applies not only to formal institutions such as police, but also to informal civil organizations, including unregistered neighborhood watch groups as in USA. Davis extends this notion of demilitarization beyond national boundaries, connecting it to the global struggles such as those between Israel and Palestine. Historically, she traces the roots of militarization back to the slave patrols of the early capitalist industrial era. Now, noting now how these practices have re-emerged and became embedded in everyday life. Today, such militarization poses threats not only to Black Americans but also to other marginalized groups, including immigrants, Muslims, LGBTQ plus communities, etc. This serves as one example I often use in my lectures to illustrate critical feminist engagement in teaching and learning political science, because what I do with the critical engagement that to ask the question why that oppression took place and why it's still happening. So extending Davis scholarship, Chandra Mohanty identifies the contemporary challenges of sustaining critical feminist engagement within academia. So Chandra, what Mohanty did that, she brought that Davis ideology to understand the academia, the contemporary academic context. As a scholar who represents the millennial timeline and identity politics of being Indian American, Mohanty seeks to deconstruct not only academic colonialism but also growing corporatization of higher education. Citing Ben Okari's Astonishing the Gods, published in 1995, she recalls his vision of the university as a lifelong, collective learning space that values listening, silence, and meditation as forms of learning, where intellectual and spiritual labor connected to creativity. And research is viewed as a process of discovering the principles and values of human existence within a broader physical and cosmic environment. Mohanty argues that this vision has now become both utopian and nearly impossible to achieve. I remember when I started my universities to do the PA, I thought the universities are the place. Explore the universal knowledge. So what is the universal knowledge? That's where what I have been thinking. That I thought it's going to be a very quiet, calm, and the brick buildings, everything. That was the very stereotyping. I know that. So bring those all things. What Mohanty tried to argue that was the ideal university, but now it's become utopian. She attributes this shift to the transformation of university into profit-driven institutions, a manifestation of corporatism. Under such system, Mohanty contends that ethical pedagogy and the genuine pursuit of knowledge have become profound struggles, particularly for those grounded in feminist principles and practices. Because feminist principles and practices always try to engage with the critical understanding, but what we were given or we were assigned to do right now is to profit making. So there is a clash, and it will continue. The academia has been a site of feminist struggle. So always women been either looked down or given a very hard time within academia. However, it has now also become a struggle in itself to survive within a space increasingly shaped by a corporate colonialism, which reintroduces masculinist, class-based, racial, and other hierarchical divisions into academia. For instance, the privatization of universities and transformation of curricula into a development training programs designed to serve corporate interests have reconstructed academic landscape. Power hierarchies have emerged based on which courses generate the most revenue, granting authority to course leaders who are then positioned to determine the content and direction of teaching and learning modules. Citing Stanley Arnowitz, Mohanty refers to the universities that offer instant or full online courses as knowledge factories, digital diploma mills that epitomize the rise of academic capitalism. The critical concern that Mohanty raises is not limited to the mode of delivery or the duration of academic courses, but extends to their content, which she identifies as predominantly global north-centric, and masculinist in orientation. These courses are often exclude critical engagement in favor of market-based skill development, tailored to meet the demands of the corporate world. In doing so, there is erasing meaningful inquiry into the origins and development of gendered, racialized, and class-based everyday politics. Consequently, both the process and the outcomes of education became and becoming commodified. Then you always have a price tag on it that reduce the knowledge to marketable product. This leads to a fundamental question: what counts as knowledge within such an educational system? As Mohanty asserts, what we know and how we know it, our ability to learn from and about the realities of communities around us is deeply challenged in a globalized corporatized academic world where curricula have become representations of particular privileged worldviews. Thus, the scholarship of Davis and Mohanty leads to the next point of discussion: what do we teach and why in political science? Especially in academia, increasingly shift toward market-driven environment rather than focused on exploration and critical engagement. This question prompts a reflection on my own teaching of gender and politics and South Asian politics in a virtual classroom via Microsoft Teams aimed and engaging Generation Z students. I believe it is important to describe the teaching environment I engaged with before I dwell into the content of my courses. This is post-COVID-19 era, in which academia has increasingly shifted toward screen-centered teaching and learning, and undergraduates participate in classes through virtual platforms such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, which themselves are shaped by corporate infrastructure. So you have to have the license. By turning on cameras and microphones and using emojis and other digital reactions, teachers and learners are able to interact, communicate. This virtual classroom culture is new, not only to me, but also to the generation, is it? Although the mode of teaching is new, the subjects themselves, gender and politics, South Asian politics, are not. They're very prolonged and evolved, and it's always connect with the empirical understanding and always go with the real social realities. So the method I use to explore these subjects relies on an empirical based synthesis of theories, which reflects the everyday lives of selected communities around us. These everyday experiences reveal community realities of struggles, aspirations, resistance, and survivals that theme that resonate with the both millennials and Generation Z students. With this background, now I share my empirical observations as a millennial teacher to the Generation Z students. Teaching gender and politics is particularly challenging in contexts where masculinist politics prevail. In such environments, both teaching and learning about gender can be stigmatized or shamed. Learning students to respond with the rejection and social isolation. So I would like to share one of my experiences that since I always talk about women, there was an interpretation of my discussion that she is a particular sexual oriented. That's why she assigned to her role being assigned to talk about women. So that's how academia works, as I experienced. It's not the way to work, but that's how the reality. This reaction does not stem from lack of understanding of the course content, but rather than encountering individual cases of reactionary politics in which gendered issues are often dismissed as difficult or utopian. So I always been defined as a difficult person to deal with. Consequently, engaging undergraduates in these courses is inherently challenging, a challenge further amplified when the course was at one point proposed for removal under the Quality Assurance Program introduced by the Sri Lankan government in collaboration with the World Bank. That is the unfortunate. Why does sense of phantasm arise in teaching and learning gender and politics? You know, Judith Butler recently published a book that the phantasm, why people afraid of this gender. What is that? Why people being called that you are sin because you stand for the gender identities? There is no simple answer, but primary reason is that the course provokes critical engagement with social realities, centering on the fundamental question, why? So through the feminist engagement, we always raise the question that why it happened. So why does this occur? Why does women choose to stay away from electoral politics? Why have ethnically marginalized women organized militarily to resist oppression? Why is the labor of women in the garment industry socially unrecognized and excluded from welfare professions? Why do women in plantation sectors still face persistent wage gaps? Why are undergraduates discouraged from writing dissertation on gender and politics? These why inquiries cultivate critical thinking, enabling students to examine social realities that challenge existing power hierarchies, whether based on gender, class, race, language, labor divisions, profit motives, or broader structures of corporativism. These questions are not designed to train minds to conform, but rather disrupt the conventional thinking, encouraging students to think beyond the constraints of pre trained thought. They are not intended to sharpen skills merely for corporate advancement, but to critique, challenge, and transform corporate and societal structures. Now I turn to the reflections on how undergraduates respond to the online sessions of gender and politics. Because these sessions were recorded, because these sessions were recorded, many students remained quiet during the Q&A sessions. That's what I experienced. However, some engaged by sending me individual messages with the questions or comments on the content. Since their names appeared in the online attendance logs, I could call them on by their name, which many found intimidating, feeling as though being put on them a spot challenged the democratic atmosphere of the classroom. Some even perceived my naming them during the session as a form of authoritarian control. So what I'm telling here is that having the virtual realities, having the virtual class, and sometimes it tends to have the democratic environment, or sometimes it assign me to have the power to call them. Okay, what do you think? What do you know? What call in by their names, put them on a spotlight, and they feel like it's a kind of authoritarian approach. But at the same time, they feel to share what they feel about gender and politics. They took the opportunity to send me the messages. So the method of delivering this kind of uh, critical thinking again being challenged either by the person who's delivered it as well as by the environment. So I should have a critical reflection on myself as well. Beyond the dynamics of interactions, material conditions also pose significant challenges. I'm talking about the teaching gender and politics to the Sri Lankan students. They had a very good time, and they well educated, and they well engaged with the discussion. But beyond the dynamics of interactions, material condition also pose significant challenges for them. Many students struggle to participate due to the lack of access to smart devices, poor internet connectivity, and high cost of data services. This highlights the way in which technological corporatism exerts the power over access to education, a basic human right that underscores the structural inequalities that persist even in virtual learning environments. The next experience is that teaching South Asian politics in the UK that offers a unique experience due to the medium of communication, personalities of the undergraduates, and availability of virtual facilities. Unlike my experience elsewhere, I did not encounter students unable to access online sessions due to poor infrastructure. Therefore, I can assert that virtual access and digital resources were more evenly distributed in this context. However, teaching South Asian politics presents its own challenges. It requires moving beyond binary offensive, defensive epistemologies and establishing connection between South Asian political realities and Anglo-centric world, while integrating both colonial and post-colonial perspectives. Therefore, I always begin with the interactive query. Why should you learn South Asian politics? Why? Why do you want to do that? What is the purpose? I categorize the responses into three main themes. Career opportunities in the international labor market, bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, international security and international security considerations. The globalization aspect shaped their engagement with South Asian politics, while I also noted a certain anxiety about potential reversal of Anglo-centric colonialism into Asian hegemony under Chinese leadership. Throughout the interactive sessions, undergraduates voluntarily expressed their views on issues of unfair, unjust trade practices, supply chain logistics in their everyday life, and militarization and its regional expansion. I didn't have to call by their names. They present themselves voluntarily. They express their views. They never thought that there is a kind of a recording going on. They try to enjoy that virtual freedom.
Aruni, I'm just going to jump in here and let you know there's 5 more minutes of the
Yes,
presentation, which will give us 20 minutes for questions at the end. Thank you
right.
so
Thank you.
much. Thank you.
So I'm nearly there now. So these two distinct empirical readings from my teaching experience, and I do not claim that one is superior to another. I would argue that, however, teaching generation isn't in a virtual classroom prompted me to reflect on my own millennial tendency to create a safe space for interaction rather than defaulting to a more authoritative teaching style. Generation Z experience much of their everyday life in a virtual reality. They engage with politics online and inhabit spaces shaped by virtual aspirations, fantasies, anxieties, and phantasm. From this empirical observation, I realized that these virtual realities are shaped by technological corporatism, whereas millennials were positioned within systems of corporate production. Generation Z navigates the world dominated by technological corporatism, where access, engagement, and knowledge are mediated through digital infrastructure. In conclusion, I assert that Generation Z is experiencing corporate structural challenges much like millennials did. In a digital uh, world, Generation Z is beginning to organize collectively for activism, challenging the impacts of corporatism. While it is their task to mobilize, it is a responsibility of academics to engage with the Generation Z and help cultivate their critical consciousness. Millennials have already navigated corporate challenges in various ways, from downsizing to the erosion of the state welfare, while Generation Z now confront the pressures related to survival, conflict, and social welfare. Both generations also share global challenges such as climate change and energy crisis, which is in a virtual context take on additional significance. Collaboration between millennials and Generation Z is therefore essential, rather than framing this relationship as millennial rescuing Generation Z narrative. A cooperative or international approach offers a best chance to develop critical thinking, collective activism, and meaningful social change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aruni. I found that absolutely fascinating. Thank you.